Welcome, my dear students of Class 12, to this Dodashant and radio tutoring with me, your tutor Atsinyo, and this is from the Directorate of School Education, Nagaland. So today, our topic is a piece of bread from the prose section, that is your literature reader section. But I hope you also have your main course book with you, because we will also be doing some exercises on that as well. In fact, some tips I would be giving you. Now, a piece of bread written by François Coppée, and he is a French writer. Now, you must have noticed that this is something that I've kept telling you, that is, in order to read anything, you need to take a look at the background check or the author. So that's what we are going to do right now. So François Coppée was born on 26th January 1842 to 1908. So we learned that he is a French poet and a novelist, and you will find that he usually also writes short stories. And most of his work are about poverty and patriotism. Now, what is poverty? Poverty is about, or in other words, a state of being poor, and patriotism here is referring to a person who have great passion or great love for his country. So now that gives us the clue here. From the topic, that is a piece of bread, we learned that the content is going to do something with a piece of bread or related to that. And we also learned from the background check on the author, we also learned that he usually talks about poverty and patriotism. So that is something what we are going to explore today. Now, our main story focus is of course going to be the story here, but we are also going to go about with a few reading skills as well. Now, what are skills? Skills here is referring to abilities, your ability to read. Now, most of us, we think that, oh, I know how to read, or we think that just knowing the story to a section of your literature, we think that we will be able to write our answers, but that is not only the case here. So we need to focus on your reading, and I want to suggest that you do not neglect your main course book. You would get a lot of reading exercises worksheet, so try to practice that, and also try to take the tips from today's class and use it when you work on your worksheet. Because you see, your reading section also carries 20 marks, and your literature reader section is also 30 marks. So it is very close. So you must not neglect it. In fact, if you look at your literature section, you will find that there are lots of things to read and work on. But for reading, all you have to do is pick up the skills, and you will be able to score very well in the exam as well. So that's what I would like to suggest. Now let's take a look at the background of the story. You may want to write this down. Our story is the scene, or the background, or the backdrop of the story is a wartime scene, all right? And it has to do with the war, that is France and Prussian. Prussian here is referring to the German in, France and Prussian War, 1887, all right? So that is the backdrop of our story. So we are going to deal with something to do with a war backdrop or scene here. Now, there are two major characters that you will find. The first one is Henri d'Ardimont, and the other one is Jean Victor. So these are all French names, so that's how you would be pronouncing it. And now, before we look into what this story is all about, let's question ourselves first. What is the idea of friendship? Or what do you think of friendship? Most of us, we would associate friendship or a true friendship with, your childhood friends whom you grew up with, and also perhaps most friendship and best friends are also made when you go to a new class and the person sitting next to you becomes your best friend. You know, that's how our friendship usually begins. But in the story, we are going to talk about a little bit of a different kind of a friendship here, which happened in a very odd manner, in a very odd incident. So that's what we are going to deal with, and I want you to keep the idea of friendship in mind as we go along. Now, if you read the whole story in other texts, you will find that the scene or the story begins with the Duke. He was standing to his racehorse at Aix of Savoy, which is a place in France. Now, that already tells us that a person who actually owns a racehorse is actually a very rich person here. So that tells us that he is a very rich fellow. Now, the Duke here is a title, all right? It's a title, and it's different from your surname or your second name. For example, let's take the example of Miss Lily Kent. So Lily is the name and Kent is the surname or the second name, and it is not a title. A title is only given by someone in royalty, or you earned it. For instance, the title of doctor, doctorate, that is a title, all right? Now, so the Duke, we learned here that he comes from a royal family. He is a nobleman, in fact. So he is very rich and he has his race horses. He is also, we learned that he was having his breakfast at a very fancy restaurant that is a cafe, and he was being served with all these interesting food items. So when that was happening, he happened to read a newspaper, that morning's newspaper. And in that newspaper, he learned that France was being defeated at a certain area, part of the France, that they were being defeated in their own homeland. So when he read that, blood mounted upon his face, which means he was filled with great anger. So that tells us here that he is a very patriotic person. He has great love for his country. And in an instant, he decided to join the army. So he called his valet. Again, you may want to take a look at the word valet here. Valet here is a personal male who carries your luggage, and that again tells us that the Duke is very rich, who does not have only just one servant, but also have a lot of servants who tend to his different needs. So that's the Duke that we see here, a nobleman, a gentleman, who is living a very lavish, extravagant life. And yet, he also felt so proud for his country that he wanted to defend it. So that's why, within 2 hours of that decision, he boarded the express, which means the train, to Paris. Remember, he was first at Aix of Savoy, and now he boarded the train to Paris. And on reaching that, he enlisted, he enrolled, joined the regiment. So a regiment is a unit of army which is headed by a sergeant, which is headed by a lieutenant or a colonel, all right? And in that regiment, it was again further divided into 2 companies, and he was of the company of Vinoy's Corps. So his job now, from a nobleman, a duke, to a soldier, his job was to take care after or look after the cannon. A cannon is a big gun that is used in the infantry. Infantry here is referring to warfare on foot. So he became a soldier overnight, we can say. And now the scene has completely changed. He was at a tavern, which means an inn. Earlier, before the wartime, the tavern here is a fancy inn. We can say a fancy restaurant or hotel. So now, what happened is this tavern was completely destroyed, bombed by shells. And he also noticed that the roof bore holes and that the roof bored holes, and that blood was splattered on the walls as though it was painted with blood. So that was the scene that he found there. Even the road was bombed in such a way that it became uneven and overgrown with broom plants. So all this scene has started to make him feel very depressed, and he started to feel very gloomy, which means sad. Now, we also learned that it was during winter season, and it was very cold. He started to shiver. All this scene has made him feel so gloomy, and he started to shiver. and he turned up his collar of his greatcoat that is made of fur, and still he was shivering, shuddering, and he started to feel hungry. Now, when he started to feel hungry, he took out his knapsack, his bag, and took out that ration bread, ammunition bread. So since he does not have a knife, he started to eat it nimbly with his hands. See, the knife here is also very symbolic here because he is a nobleman. If he eats at all, he would usually use a fork and a knife and so on. But now he's acting as a soldier here. And he started to eat that bread, but he could not eat it. He could not swallow it. Why? Because that bread was very hard and it was stale, bitter. So now he thought about all those former days when he could have get nice meal. He was thinking about how he sat at the Café Anglais and he was having his, how he would have been served by servants in a very graceful manner, in a very sophisticated manner, how wine would be poured to him, how he would go and have cutlet and buttered eggs and asparagus. So asparagus here is a very expensive vegetable and not just any kind of ordinary vegetable here, but look at it. The description says that he would have only the tip of the asparagus. So that means he usually go for the finest food items and being served in a very graceful manner. So that was his situation earlier, but now he finds himself in that depressing situation. So out of frustrations, out of impatience, he threw that bread into the mud. And at that moment, what happened is that we learned that a soldier in the line, which means from the same company, came out of the tavern and picked up that bread, took a step back, and started to wipe that bread with his sleeves. And we also learned that he started to chew on it, eat that bread as though it's the finest food. So now when that happened, the Duke was very embarrassed, with himself. The Duke started to feel very guilty. Here I am, thinking about how I can have a nice life out there, but now here is another person, a soldier, who seemed to be very hungry and cleaning a bread that was thrown away and that was being cleaned, covered with mud, being cleaned and eating it. So he came forward to the soldier and said, "You must be very hungry." So the soldier replied, "As you can see." And he also said that I'm not dainty, which means I'm not concerned about unclean food here. He must be very hungry, now we learned. So now the Duke, he started to feel sorry for this person, and he also apologized, saying that I don't want you to have a bad opinion of me, which means he's a true gentleman. And so he offered him his brandy or cognac, you can say, and that's how their friendship was born. John Victor was really touched by this gesture of the Duke, and they shake a hearty handshake, and from there on we learned that John Victor narrated his stories, and from the story we learned that John Victor was a foundling, which means a child who was abandoned at an infant stage, and abandoned, or we can also say that whose parents were not known. So he was an orphan and he lived in an asylum. See, an asylum is a place where mentally ill people are kept. So not just any ordinary orphanage for children, but he lived in an asylum. That was his situation. And the interesting thing that we find in John Victor is that he was not complaining. He remembered fondly about how his childhood days were spent in that asylum. He remembered about a sister who was very kind to him. He remembered that the bed sheets were clean, white, and see, those kind of small things he was appreciating and narrating it to our Duke. So from there on, we learned that he must be a very humble person. We also learned that the sister told him to be honest. So even though his situation was such, he never steals food. That's what we can infer here. And later on, we also learned that he became old enough, 12 years old, and so he was sent away with a communion. We all know that a communion is only a small bit of bread and maybe a little bit of wine. That's all. So with that, he was sent off. And he found apprenticeship, which means an internship, to one manager, and this manager happens to be a great miser. Now, even in that situation, we find that if you read the full text, you will find that blind people from the asylum were being made to work there. What was his work? His work was to mend chairs, all right, mend chairs. Now, old chairs, in fact. So that was his work, and he worked there for 3 years, and he said that it could have been learned, the art could have been learned in a few days, but he was being used, or we can say abused, all right, child abused here, abused in that way abused in that way by the manager. But again, he was not complaining. I'm sure he does not know that that was what children were feeling. So see, even though his condition was such a pitiable condition, he never complained. And later on, we also learned that he became old enough and he was sent out on his own. But what happened is that he could not find any work, even though he was willing, and he would go and pick up bread which were thrown away by school children, and he would pick those things up, clean it and eat it. And some other days when he could not find any hard bread, he would collect it, soak it overnight so that he can have it. So that was his condition here. All these stories get unfolded as the Duke and Jean Victor talked to each other. And this is how Jean Victor explained that you must be finding me very funny when I picked up that bread. But see, that was how I lived. That's how he narrated his story. Now, we also learned that when he turned 18, which means he became old enough, he enlisted himself in the army. And unfortunately, he got injured and he was sent to the hospital. But in the hospital, he at least gets some food. But because his injury was not a major injury, he was released to be out on the battlefield again. So now again he is starving. And that's why he said that I know starving, or I am hungry all the time. He does not know anything else except being hungry. So that piece of bread that was thrown away by the Duke was such a precious food for him. So now the Duke, after learning this story about Jean Victor, he felt very sorry for him, and he is a kind person. So without telling him that he is a duke, a man of great nobility, he simply said he befriended him in the same equal footing that is that of a soldier. And he said, John, he called him by his name, Jean Victor, when all this is over, in other words, when the war is over, I will surely do something for you. He promised him in that manner. And now, even if there is this commissary. A commissary is an army canteen. They are not able to get fine food there either. So that is the only thing that we have here. Now remember, back in the olden days, what happened is John Victor would walk past bakeries and he would wish to have those things. So the Duke learned that, and he said that only after the war is over, I will be able to help you. And he promised to help him. And he wished that the war would be over. So that's how they became friends. Now soon, we also learned that they went back to their camp and they were sleeping. Now, what happened is that Jean Victor woke up in the middle of the night. Probably he was hungry, because we learned that he is always hungry. And when he woke up, he saw that the moonlight was beaming on the Duke, and it gave such a handsome picture. The Duke looked so handsome, like a Greek god Endymion. So he was admiring at that Duke and thinking that, oh, my friend is such a handsome fellow, such an admirable fellow. So at that point of time, a sergeant came and called out for 5 soldiers to go and relieve the sentinels. Sentinels here is referring to soldiers who are guarding the camp at the gate. They were supposed to relieve it, changed the duty. So it was Duke d'Ardimant's turn, and however, the Duke was sleeping so soundly in that way that Jean-Victor felt sorry for him, and he asked the sergeant, "Let me take his place." And the sergeant allowed him, and that's how Jean-Victor went to replace Ardimant for the duty. Now, we learned that after half an hour later, we learned that the soldiers came rushing back. What happened was that a soldier reported that they were being attacked by the German, that is the Prussian, and that only 4 of them returned. So now, out of the commotion, even Ardimant also woke up and he asked, "What time is it? I'm supposed to be on duty." And he learned that Jean-Victor took his place. And when he looked for Jean-Victor, he was nowhere to be found. And he asked what happened. And another soldier reported that he was shot in the head and he died without a word. So that's how the sad, tragic end was. A sad, tragic end came to their friendship. And that's how, if we think about it, now, if Jean-Victor had not taken the place of Ardimant, it would have been Ardimant who would have died. But in place of it, Jean-Victor died. So we realized here that for a simple gesture, just a simple word of kindness, when all these things is over, I will surely remember you. That's what the Duke told him. Just a simple gesture, this fellow had taken it so wholeheartedly and took this friendship so seriously that he was willing to go and take the duty of the Ardimant. He did not remember, he did not realize that this was a nobleman, all right? And that's what happened. So here, you will find that the story here is about true friendship, and true friendship that was being forged or bonded in a very odd situation. They met in a wartime. They were, in other words, in a very equal footing here. Both of them are now a soldier. Nobody is a duke who is of high nobility or a poor fellow here. They were at an equal footing. And when that find themselves in that equal footing, we realize that they have a lot of common things. And here we also found that Duke d'Ardimant, he developed compassion. His understanding of people was improved because he realized that all this fashionable life, all this extravagant life that he lived was not that important compared to how other people are suffering. So he developed empathy. Now, that is one of the moral of our story here. We would further discuss another point later on. Now, the story does not end there. It does not end there. And we realize that after some few years, the Duke was at a club gambling, and he lost a lot of louis, which means gold coins. Back in those days, the currency was made with gold, so he had lost a lot of coins. And so he was starting to get a headache. And he told his friend, the Count, "Let's go out for a walk. Let's walk home." And the Count did not think that it was a very good idea, but he agreed anyway, and they decided to walk and let the drivers of the coupe, which is again another luxury car, it was dismissed, and they started to take that walk. So it was again a very similar situation here, a cold night, midnight, and they were taking that walk. And what happened, by sheer chance, what happened is that the Duke knocked a large piece of bread accidentally, and it rolled down into the mud. So when he saw that, remember, he's a duke, all right? So when he saw that, he stooped down, bent down, and picked that bread up and started to wipe it clean with his armonil handkerchief. And armonil handkerchief here is, now he's a man of royalty, so even his handkerchief has got this logo of a royal logo. So he started to clean that dirty bread with his handkerchief, and the Count was surprised. He found it very funny and asked him, "Whatever are you doing that for?" And he started to laugh, because if you think about it, a duke stooping down in the middle of the night, picking up a dirty piece of bread is a very strange thing indeed. So his friend started to laugh at him in that manner, but he was almost choking with tears because now he recalled that friend who had died, or that friend who sacrificed his life for him. So he was almost choking with tears and could not speak, but he said that, "Do not laugh at me." He told his friend not to laugh at him because it insulted him, because it offended him. Now, why did he say that? Because he knows better now. He knows that there are people who are suffering, and in also acknowledging the fact that he has a friend called Jean Victor. So that's how the story ends, and we will find that from this whole story here, we will find that the central idea, the main idea of our story here is all about friendship and humanity. So what is humanity? Humanity is fellow feeling for another man, okay? Now, consider this case. If the Duke had never enlisted in the war, he would never have come across a person such as Jean Victor, and he would never know that people go hungry, that children were being abused, and that people would stoop down for a dirty bread, people would stoop down, bend down and pick and eat. So he learned all those things and he developed empathy, fellow feeling for other people. So we can say that the Duke has also learned a lesson. Now, taking that scenario, here is the moral. From here, we learned that when we step out of our comfort zone, we get introduced to different kind of situations. And that's how our fellow feelingness or sense of belongingness or the togetherness feeling will be developed when we learn about other people, their situations, and we get to understand the surroundings around us better. So that is the moral of the story here. Now, very quickly, since I've also said that we are going to do some reading skills here, very quickly I'm going to show you a few things about how to go about with your reading skills. Remember, when we say skills, we are talking about abilities, okay? And so skills are abilities to be able to read. There are specific skills required to read. I have given you some examples. Another thing that you need to remember is, the first one is intensive reading. Just to save time, I'll use the abbreviated letter. And extensive reading. Now, what is an intensive reading? An intensive reading is when you are trying to read with a purpose, to find out facts or figures, all right? I'm sure you have the habit of reading newspaper, and when you read a newspaper, you are specifically looking for informations. What is today's news, you know? So when you are going through the topic, you are skimming, all right? You are skimming. That is one of the reading skills. You are just looking for the information, all right? And then I'm sure many of you like to read the entertainment section. So in the entertainment section, when you find it interesting, you would go and read the whole article. So when you do that, it becomes an extensive reading here. So extensive reading is when you read for pleasure, okay? Now, both are equally important, okay? When you stress yourself so much about what is these new words, what is this new fact that I have to understand from this story, if you go and stress yourself so much in that way, many things gets lost. So I would suggest that you go with extensive reading first. First, read your text to enjoy it, all right? And then later on, you can pick up the facts or information and work on your questions and answers. Now, remember, reading skills section, in fact, your reading worksheet is very important, like I said. So you need to practice. Without practice, you cannot think that I will be able to score very good marks. It's okay. You cannot go and be misguided in that way, all right? You need to practice. So again, I'm emphasizing that you have to practice on your reading worksheet. So now, from the example of our lesson, that is a piece of bread, we can understand here that when you read it, you are collecting bits of information. First, you read it to enjoy it. That is comprehension, all right? So when you read it, the full story, you get to understand, oh, so this story is talking about friendship. It is about humanity. You get to understand all those things. That is comprehension, the full picture, all right? And reading is not just about specific information, to collect specific information. Who is the character, Henri de Ardemont, that is only specific information. You need to understand it in the full picture. And to do that, you need to read the whole text. The class that I have given right now, this is actually just a supplementary for you. You need to read it to be able to really enjoy it and understand the full thing. So that's what I would suggest. Go for extensive reading first, then intensive, practice on your worksheet. And here is another tip. When you write your answers for this, specifically for this lesson, you would find that it would be easier for you to work out your understanding of the text by drawing a column. I would suggest you draw a column, and you can mark here as Henri de Ardemont and here for Jean Victor. And you try to find out the qualities, character traits. Character traits means personalities, qualities, all right? We can say that Henri Ardemont is a very kind person. He's a gentleman, he's a noble fellow, a man of title, and you substantiate it from your text with examples. And in the case of Jean, he's a very honest person. Even though he's poor, he's a very honest person. So from the story, again, back up your points with that and write your answers in that manner. That's how you can also go about with your questions and answers. Now, I hope you find all these tips useful, and it will be a waste if you do not apply it. So I would really suggest you work on your reading worksheet, read the rest of the stories, and work out the questions and answers in that manner. And thank you all very much for joining me.